All right, everybody, today we're going to be going over the turbo draft, which is going on all the tankers here in the very near future. We're going to go over the components first, and then we're going to roll into the actual setup and then pump into the truck. So the very first thing we'll look at here is the turbo draft itself. This is the unit. Pretty simple. We got the screen across the top, our 5-inch connection that'll return it to the apparatus, a 2.5 connection where a 3-inch line, when we get to the next video you'll see, it goes into the system. The system works on a very simple principle, the Venturi type of system. So as water comes in from the 3-inch line, pressurizes into the system, passes through here, and before it hits the 5-inch, there's actually an opening in space. This is where the water is drawn in when being pumped. A couple different principles just to think about with this system. We have the ability to be upwards of 200 feet maximum from the static water source to the apparatus. We also have 20 feet of elevation drop from the steamer connection to the water source. That's our max. At those maxes, we can achieve somewhere in the neighborhood of about 400 gallons per minute. As we shorten those distances and the elevation, say for a 50-foot section at around 5 feet, we can easily achieve somewhere in the neighborhood of 550, close to 600 gallons per minute. When this unit comes off the truck, the only other thing you'll need is the float. And it does have a nice single hook here in the end to attach our float. One, it's going to keep the unit upright, so the screen is facing upright. And we need about a 1.5 feet, 2 feet of water between here and the strainer. That way we don't get any problems with sucking in air. So a simple float we already have on the apparatus and connected to our unit. And then we'll follow into here shortly and it'll show the actual layout.
All right, right here we're going to demonstrate how to set up the turbo draft. First of all, you're going to grab your float and the turbo draft from the apparatus. As you proceed out to your static water source, preferably 2 firefighters would make this much simpler. One's getting the hose out, the other's getting the pieces of equipment. Once we get them stretched out and determine that we have the appropriate length to reach it from that static water source to the engine, that's what we want. So we do have options, 100-foot sections, 50-foot sections, and 25-foot sections. So if we only need 50 feet to reach that source, use a 50-foot section. Now as you make your 2 connections, the 5-inch, now you're going to be making your 3-inch line connection. This is going to be your pressurized line going into the unit. Attach your float. Another option would be you could use a rope and tie it or secure it to a ladder and work it in. But in this particular scenario, we're able to bring it down, making sure you have a lot of slack in your hose behind you so that you have room to get it out. Now, one of the benefits is when this is pressurized, you might get in the water initially. When the 3-inch line is pressurized, it's going to almost push it out a little bit further for you and get it out into a nice area. But the float keeps it upright, screened to the top. Now it's time to dress up your lines. You want to basically get as straight lines and as little twists and turns, especially in the 5-inch line, as possible. Now back at the engine, time to make our connections. 5-inch into our intake valve, attach our 3-inch to a discharge. Now when you start to get ready to pump this truck in the apparatus, we have to basically cause that Venturi effect to occur. So we're going to need to pump somewhere between 150 and 200, most of the time around 160 on the line of our 3-inch line in order to achieve that. Once we get the operation all set up, now it's time to actually put the truck in pump gear. All right, once we have all of our connections connected and we're in pump gear, we're going to pull our tank to pump, place the governor in RPM mode, and begin opening the discharge headed to the turbo draft while dialing up our pressure to about 160 psi. Shortly after that, we should notice the water coming up to 5-inch as we start to displace our air out of the relief valve. Once we've got it relieved out, close that off. And now it's time to open up the intake valve itself. Now, once we get to this point, it's time to close our tank to pump, open up our tank fill. Remember, we utilize water to do this process, and we need to get water back into the tank and fill it back up in the event that we need it. It does take approximately about 300 gallons of water from the tank to begin this process, so we want to get that filled back up. So as you can see right now, we're filling up the tank. Once we're there, we can open up the appropriate valve to flow our water. Sometimes during this process, you might actually get water flowing a little bit too soon. In the event that that happens, immediately open up your tank to pump. Make sure all of the valves are closed, and then begin closing the tank to pump valve. Once that valve is completely closed, and we're now flowing our water, we're now operating solely on the turbo draft water coming in from the static source. In this particular video, we're flowing out of line approximately about 300 to 400 gallons a minute. It's important for the driver engineer to be in close proximity to the hose and the pump panel, for the sole fact of simply being able to look at the 5-inch hose, reaching down, feeling that hose, you can actually tell what's going on and where you're at with your maximum flow. If for some reason at one point in time you start drawing more water than is available, you start to see the hose suck down. Immediately reach the tank to pump, flood the system, and then readjust your pressure on whatever that discharge valve. You might have had the tank fill still open or partially cracked, or you're pumping more water than is actually available to the scene. So you would immediately contact the IC and let them know you have to dial it back some.